Welcome to the Vermont State House, which is, surprisingly, one of Vermont's top tourist draws. With over 150,000 visitors per year, the State House is right up there with the Shelburne Museum and Ben & Jerry's ice cream as the top attractions for the state of Vermont. Montpelier being the smallest capital city in the country, they get off the interstate and the first thing they see is that Golden Dome. And the Golden Dome seems to act as something of a magnet for visitors to come to the front doors of this building and enjoy a remarkably wonderful experience, actually, in a fully restored mid-19th century state capitol building, one that, like the state itself, is remarkably intimate. As visitors enter the State House in the main lobby, the two presidents of the United States who come from Vermont are enshrined here. Calvin Coolidge, who was president in the 1920s and was actually from Plymouth Notch, Vermont, is probably the best known of the two presidents from Vermont. On the other side is Chester Arthur, who is a little less well known, a president during the 1880s who, as a teenager, left the state with his parents to go to New York State and considered himself, as an adult, a New Yorker. Both of these gentlemen became president after their predecessor died in office, so they were actually elected initially as vice presidents of the United States, and both of them pursued their political careers, as we said, in other states. So it remains for a Vermont politician to actually successfully make it to the Oval Office. Vermont has a two-year term for its governor. Throughout the 19th century, there was a fairly brisk turnover, and since the state has a very large number of governors, over 80 of them, their portraits can be found throughout the building, ranging in size from humble, small engravings to marble busts, but the vast majority of them are oil-on-canvas portraits of those governors. Among the larger portraits that have recently come into the collection is this portrait of Governor Howard Dean, a recent aspirant to the presidency of the United States, but not hanging in the main lobby because, of course, he did not succeed in his quest. It's also a rather unusual portrait given its informality. It takes place on the shore of Lake Champlain, his favorite canoeing spot, and when it was unveiled to great notoriety, it was dubbed by a nickname. The portrait is known as L.L. Dean. 1791 is the year that Vermont joined the Union as the 14th state, the very first state to be brought into the federal union under the newly adopted Constitution and observing the rules of bringing additional territory into the United States. After that happened, for the next 14 years, there was no capital. They moved sessions of the legislature around from town to town. And it was not until 1805 that they decided that this didn't make sense anymore and that they would establish a permanent capital somewhere centrally located. So Montpelier is very centrally located. It's almost dead center in the middle of the state of Vermont. It's been the capital ever since a very humble little wooden building was built as that first capitol building. That humble wooden meeting house structure gave way in the 1830s to a second state house, something a little more stately, built out of granite from nearby Barry. That building would succumb to fire in 1857, and on the same site, an elevated perch above the rest of Montpelier, the third and final state house would be constructed, completed in 1859 in the Italian Renaissance Revival style. This is the House chamber in the Vermont State House. the largest room in the State House by far, and the heart and the soul of the building. It's right dead center in the State House. A remarkable place in that it has all of its original furniture for the most part, but more remarkably, it has its original gas lighting. This building didn't suffer from losing much of its original fabric from the middle of the 19th century. It makes it easy for us, as a result, to see this chamber as it was at the outbreak of the Civil War, when Governor Erastus Fairbanks stood at this very podium and exhorted Vermonters to save the Union by volunteering for the forces that were sent beyond the state to try to help Lincoln keep the Union together. And this room resonates with that period and the very time when this nation was plunged into that catastrophic war. 150 years later, this became the scene for a battle over the civil rights of homosexuals, when gay marriage came to the forefront in Vermont, first as a battle over civil unions, and eventually for full marriage equality. And much of the same fractious energy that is involved in legislative bodies throughout the country took place in this humble little State House, where advocates for both sides of that issue crowded into the building, and passionate addresses were definitely heard. Vermont was the very first state to legislatively call for civil unions. That was the baby step that was taken in the direction of what eventually would be full gay marriage. We also were the first legislative body without a judicial mandate to respond to gay marriage in that way. Vermont is a state of many town halls and many accessible political processes. And it's very special that this small Capitol building accommodates a legislative session that goes from January to May of each year, and does so in a very fitting way. In other words, Vermonters crowd this very small building every legislative session to make their voices heard to these lawmakers in a very direct fashion, much more direct, I think, than the vast majority of such bodies throughout the United States. The last room on our tour is what we call the Cedar Creek Reception Room, which is, in essence, the party room at the State House. Vermont is one of the few states in the nation that has no official residence for its governor. No governor's mansion means that official entertaining has to take place right here at the State House. From the 1880s on, it became known as the Cedar Creek Room because of the large painting behind me, which is the largest picture in the state. It was painted by Julian Scott, a drummer boy and a fifer during the war. Veterans of the war themselves chose the Battle of Cedar Creek, which was fought in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia in October of 1864, as their finest moment. And Julian Scott interviewed many Vermont veterans of the war and included them in the center of the canvas. It shows the old Vermont Brigade as it rallied the Union troops who were in retreat in the Shenandoah Valley and reversed the fortunes of that army very dramatically under the command of Philip Sheridan. It measures 20 feet wide, 10 feet tall, excluding the frame, and it is surmounted at the top with Vermont's coat of arms. State capitals say something about the states they serve, as I mentioned earlier, but this State House in particular resonates with Vermont in every way. It is, as it always has been, a tight little place where a lot goes on, and we are very glad to share it with you today.